Dr. Ashten Duncan received his Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Oklahoma in 2016, Master of Public Health from OU-HSC Hudson College of Public Health in 2019, and Doctor of Medicine from the OUTU School of Community Medicine in 2021. He completed his family medicine residency training at UNM Santa Fe Family Medicine Residency Program in June 2024 and is currently a core faculty member at Médicos del Centro Family Medicine Residency in Española, New Mexico. His professional interests include native and tribal health, outpatient medicine, lifestyle medicine, public health, academic medicine, and applied research in primary care. Our second presenter, Dr. Khuzeman Abbasi, received his medical degree from the Medical University of the Americas in 2020. After graduating, he worked at Rutgers University as a research coordinator in population health studies. He moved on to work at Vanderbilt University as a research fellow conducting studies on POTS patients, where he also received an award from the American Heart Association for his abstract on cardiovascular autonomic dysfunction. He then decided to expand on his clinical experience and worked as a critical care pre-residency fellow at the University of New Mexico within the Department of Emergency Medicine. His passion and interests reside in mental health awareness, addiction medicine, research in Islamic psychology, and addressing stigmas within minority communities. And finally, our third presenter, Dr. Sana Augustine, comes from the program from her hometown of Hyderabad, Pakistan, via Wisconsin. She attended Liaquat University of Medical and Health Sciences in Pakistan. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming a physician. She has always been passionate about family medicine particularly, and her career goal is to practice both inpatient and outpatient family medicine in rural community. Outside of medicine, she enjoys spending time with her family, traveling, and cooking, and she is thrilled to be part of the Médicos del Centro Family Medicine Residency team. All right, with that said, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, it's good to see everyone here. I've got Dr. Abbasi and Dr. Augustine here with me in the same room, and let me get my slides up. We're just going to get kicked off here with our presentation today, which is going to be about public scholarship. It's definitely a topic that I think a lot of people have interacted with in different ways, but perhaps not in a way where you have been given, specific definitions for what public scholarship is, what it looks like, and how it functions within our work in healthcare. The three of us are going to really, take the deep dive into it. There will be a little bit of participation toward the end of the presentation, but the first part is really just about discussing a lot of the key concepts. So. Just to get in with our next slide here, no disclosures there. This is not a paid for presentation, and we really are just here because we're very passionate about this topic. And so with that, I wanted to go through our learning objectives. So we've got 5 for today. By the end of the presentation, we expect everyone to be able to define public scholarship and describe the forms it can assume. 2, define messaging and articulate how messaging is central to advocacy and seeking community level change. 3, apply knowledge about the contextuality of audiences to advocacy writing and other forms of public scholarship. 4, identify what narrative writing is and how it's frequently structured. And 5, develop a concrete plan for a public scholarship activity you could pursue. All right. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Abbasi.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Duncan, for that. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. As kind of like the usual Dr. Duncan form, we'll start with the case. So if we can first, obviously we'll talk, we'll just define public scholarship, but let's start with this case. And so for several years, you have been caring for Carla, a 75-year-old woman who lives alone in an apartment in Santa Fe. Carla has multiple chronic health conditions that significantly affect her quality of health, such as type 2 diabetes, chronic paraspinal muscle pain, osteoarthritis, and irritable bowel syndrome. She has Medicare Parts A and B with Humana supplement to cover the cost of her prescriptions, and does not often have problems with getting her medications covered. So while you have made progress with managing her health issues, you notice that Carla lacks access to important community resources that would make her life better. Specifically, you feel that elderly adults in the community should have more access to city-supported programming to prevent injuries from falls. So, from your residency training, you understand that advocacy for issues can take on many different forms. And you also recognize that the issues Carla's facing cannot be directly resolved in the office. So, my question to all of you will kind of open the floor is how might you proceed with advocating for a community level change in this case? So, anybody can just chime in.
Sorry, what were the issues again? Was eating.
Yeah, no, we can go back to the previous slide just to kind of like give a little bit of an idea, because yeah, and so you can also read as well. But it's just basically Carla's a 75-year-old woman. She lives alone in an apartment. She has multiple chronic health conditions. She has Medicare and Humana. Pretty much, she hasn't been having issues with getting her medications covered. But you really just want to figure out with her that you want to you want her to be involved in city supported programming to kind of prevent injuries from falls, and you really want to increase like her community resources. So basically, in terms of like advocacy, how would you kind of proceed in kind of doing community level change advocacy for her and other individuals like her?
Some community money to be allocated.
Right.
Well, we could start campaigning for more funding
Right.
into these things.
Yeah, exactly.
About informing them about the resources of the community.
Not just that, but just kind of like also just kind of not just communicating with them, but just maybe like on a greater like level, like maybe with like public health or like different services. So just ideas. I think campaigning is a great idea. That can kind of like make people aware to like promote like change. Anything else that you think?
Look for possible existing resources might have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Like important communications like expectations, like newspapers.
Yeah.
Bulletin boards, media,
yeah.
And then information during the events.
Exactly. Those are all really good things. Next slide. And this kind of really kind of goes on the basis of this like this social ecological model, where basically if we're trying to like affect at a specific level, like what we're trying to discuss about is the community level. We can kind of look at a more macro systemic level in terms of advocating like for policy and like a societal level, and that kind of will trickle down into like affecting the community, getting the community more involved, different organizations, interpersonal, like I guess within the community themselves, and then also at the individual as well. So we cannot just we don't necessarily have to just focus on the community, but we can look into more like public policies, societal changes, and that'll kind of trickle down and really affect the community and the individual, even at the micro systemic level as well. Next slide. And so, as we want to, we can talk about like public scholarship, but we want to like, actually define like what that exactly means. And so that broadly speaking, it really refers to research, teaching, and different creative practices intended for audiences outside of the academic institutions. So it can be like evidence-informed observations of professional practice, of general public interest. So this can include the work that we do specifically, even just in healthcare. And really what it's meant to do, it's meant to bridge the gap between the public and the experts by removing like the technical, jargon language and those complicated concepts that a lot of people just can't understand. So really we're trying to raise, the awareness of what is happening like in the industries that are actually affecting these individuals. And so this can take on many different forms in media, as long as the public interfaces with that type of content. And so it does not include just social media posts and just random like online pontifications. Next slide. And so I guess a couple of different examples that we have like in terms of like public scholarship are a couple of like op-eds, opinion pieces. And so a couple of us have done some, and we found some really great benefit in that. Something we might be more familiar with are like blogs, policy briefs as well. Now like what's really trending is podcasts. So I know like everybody while they're driving commuting all over the place. They're just listening to, their own, podcasts. And that's just pretty much like I think that's every other individual just getting their information from that and hearing about the news from those podcasts. There's commentaries, community engaged like research too. There's also even like exhibits are considered like a form of like public scholarship, and then also even public programs. Perfect. Yeah, and so we have like the Public Scholarship Collaborative that Stanford does as well. And then here are some cool different forms of like how public scholarship can appear. So we all kind of know like Kevin MD and kind of his like voice and like the different things that we can learn from that we get from like kevinmd.com. A couple of us have we published in the Santa Fe New Mexican with our op-ed pieces, and we're working on the Albuquerque Journal as well. And Dr. Duncan also has like experience with Tulsa World and Oklahoman. So there's like a lot. These are just like examples of like how we can like how public scholarship can appear, and it doesn't really, and it's something that we can we can really get involved in. And exactly, there's just so many numerous options. So I think what this presentation is so important because we can kind of bring awareness to the fact that we can really get involved in a lot of different things. Next slide. So what is advocacy writing, right? So this is a form of persuasive communication used to influence public opinion, policies, or decisions on a specific issue or cause. I mean, it could be like climate change, any type of reform, healthcare services, anything that you're really passionate about. It really can be, you really can write an advocacy piece on it. And it really aims to like get support for a particular belief or perspective just by presenting a clear case. I'm using like really compelling arguments and appealing to like the audience's values and interests. Once you really focus on that, you can really get the public to, you can really pique the interest and get them involved on whatever you're trying to say. So it can appear in many different publications, like including like magazines, newsletters, newspapers. Yes, some people still obviously still read newspapers, and so we just really have to understand our audience in that. And so with the op-eds, those are pretty much a very, very common example of an advocacy writing. Next slide. And so op-eds, what are op-eds? And so originally, like they appeared with kind of on the opposite of like the editorial page in a newspaper. So a term now used widely to kind of represent a column that represents strong, informed, and focused opinions of the writer on an issue of like relevance to a targeted audience. So typically it's pretty short, 600 to 800 words. Oh, I kind of reiterate this again and again that it's very clearly defined. It's a clearly defined point of view. And you have to make sure that your thought process when you're writing it, it's very clear. And you really need a strong, unique voice of the writer to kind of speak through the writing. And that really will capture the audience. Next slide. So questions you should ask yourself when considering writing an op-ed or a column is, do I have a clear point to make? What is it, right? If you don't really have a purpose of why you're writing something, the message really won't get conveyed to the audience. And who cares? So for example, the topic has to be something that's really relevant and kind of, once again, piques the interest of the audience and something that they're also passionate about too. And who is it that you're trying to convince? And so once again, you have to really understand who you're writing to. And why are you targeting that specific reader? So you really want to, you're once again, you're writing not just to kind of voice your opinion, but probably you want to, bring some awareness and possibly bring some change and, pique, once again, interest. And is there substance to my argument? So you have to make sure that if you're going to write anything like an op-ed piece, you're not just kind of like, putting your own like thoughts and there's just nothing behind it. It's really good to have some like support and evidence to kind of really back up your argument. Next slide. And so the next learning objective that I'm going to talk about is messaging and how to kind of articulate how messaging is central to advocacy and seeking community level changes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when I refer to messaging, what is messaging? It basically just consists of nonverbal and verbal content of communication. So in writing, all verbal, there can be explicit and implicit expressions. So when you're writing, there's like a common technique of showing versus telling, and there's like a balance between that. So if your readers are very attentive, they're going to pick up on this, these unstated meanings, right? So quote unquote, like a trail of breadcrumbs. So you're not just going to give it to them, right? Like what you're trying to get at, but more so you're going to kind of like lead towards that. And it kind of like, adds a little bit more suspense, but also gives them a little bit of like what you're trying to, the point that you're trying to eventually to get at. So in argumentative, persuasive, and opinion pieces, this could really like, it really comes down to like your like thesis statement and the really just the main point of what you're trying to get across. So really in short, when it comes to messaging, it's all really about contextualizing the meaning of your writing. Next slide. And so how is messaging related to advocacy? It's pretty much everything when it comes to advocacy. I mean, the act or the process of supporting a cause or proposal. So when you're advocating for like a group, or if you're advocating for an issue, your messaging really represents the significance of the situation, right? You really put some emphasis on that, and the mechanism through which others potentially could get involved. And so while advocating should be clear and it should be compelling, you can't like exposit everything that's important at once, right? So critical information may need to be coded or kind of implied, right? The idea of like a subtext. So an underlying or often distinct theme in a piece of writing or conversation. And messaging is also just a vehicle to connecting with like stakeholders and agents of change. And that's how we kind of get back to that, we can really reform policy and really change things on societal level, which will eventually affect the community, interpersonal, and also just the individual. And so next slide, please. And so who, what, when, where, why, and how of crafting a message. So who, once again, your audience, the ones that are receiving your message. You really have to take into account the socio-cultural factors. So it's important to look at the beliefs of your audience, the attitudes, the norms of society, like what's going on. And you really have to consider like their literacy, right? You can't really just overwhelm them with like technical jargon. You really need to look at who you're talking to, possibly like the cognitive like patterns and even just expectations that they as well. And so when we look at the verbal content, so the explicit meaning and the actual words. So we try to focus on like the 3 C's. So clarity, coherence, and conciseness. Like I mentioned previously, technical jargon, it can be used, but it really needs to be used judicially. So you have to really pick what's the appropriate time in your message, when you want to use it and when you actually need to use it. And then the when. So is it like current events that are going on? Like, consider the time of the year. If there's an election year, it's like, that time. And so you really need to understand all of these factors. And so there's like this measure of timeliness. And so there's like this self-reflection question of if not now, when? And so these are all different aspects that you really need to think about when really crafting a message. Next slide. And so here, once again, and then kind of to add to that, the where, right? So what form are you going to take in terms of forums or publications? Is it going to be a physical like copy or a digital copy? Is it going to be free or paid, right? Because not everybody can always afford these kind of avenues of media. And so you have to also consider who you're trying to reach. Accessibility, so important like contextual elements. And now the why, right? Like why you're doing this, and the intrinsic versus the extrinsic value, right? This means that you are essential to your message. So what's the real purpose of you even just, writing this, right? Is it going to be like for policy change? You just want to make like general awareness? Are you going to challenge like the norms of what's going on, right? And then the how, right? So how are you going to like, take this on? The explicit and implicit meaning, like the messaging. We have to both interact and shape and frame one another too. And so we have a limited amount of space with our words. And so we have to make sure that whatever words that we're using, that it can really like, say a lot. Like, once again, it can be concise, but with meaning. So it's like the economy of expression, right? So we have to really like be careful and really consider the words that we use when we message. Next slide. And now I'll let Dr. Augustine kind of transition to our third and fourth points.
And thank you so much, Khuzeman. And I think he has covered a very major portion of our the project today. So the main learning objectives here. What is define public scholarship and describe the forms it can assume. Define messaging and articulate how messaging is central to advocacy and seeking community level changes. and how to apply knowledge about contextuality of audiences to advocacy, writing, and other forms of public scholarship. And identify what narrative writing, and we have been doing with Dr. Graziano, it really is very helpful, and is how it frequently is structured. And to develop a concrete plan for a public scholarship activity you could pursue. So basically what public scholarship is, why messaging matters in advocacy, how to tailor writing to your audience, and the basics of narrative structure, and the plan your own public scholarship project. So these are some of the learning objectives we get from the whole idea. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to whom, here now we are getting deeper into. Now, to whom are you speaking? Especially think audience. All right, so number one, context. Context is the key to messaging and changes the meaning. And especially how context shapes how messages are received. Same words can mean different things in different settings. So remember, your interrogatories to assess context. This is very important. Next is audiences. Audiences are not just a group of individual people. An audience may have distinct characteristics and expectations that do not directly correspond with the sum of the parts. So basically, this is very important. This is a very important point. So, So audiences are shaped by the context, not just individuals. This is very important. And here's a little example. Vis-a-vis Jeffrey Rose's population versus individual health. Audiences is equals to defined by context and thus change over time. Now, what is target audience? Target audience is intended to receive your message. However, others will likely receive your messages too. So there's a little question, self-reflection question. Why does that matter for context? What do you think? Right. Why does the context matter? Why is it that important? It's a self-reflection question. Yes, why does that matter for context? Yeah, it's a little self-reflection. Like a context is the key to messaging, and so we start a project. We start from the context, right? What are we presenting? What context are we? What's the main reason? Why are we writing this project? What do you think is a little self-reflection? Why does the context matter? What does that matter for context? Okay.
We're trying to calculate the audience.
Yeah.
You know, the main thing is we're trying to calculate the audience, whatever, the project will be. So the whole concept is very important. We're going to choose the right subject, we're going to choose the right audience.
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. Next slide, please. Thank you, Ruby. Now, audience. Are all audiences created equally? Now, that's another question. Perhaps an obvious no for most of us. However, audiences do function similarly and can be conceptualized. Important part. Then business use of audience analysis to characterize, like physical and biomedical, demographic, behavioral, and cultural, and psychological and social. So yeah, of course. So what the lens you use to analyze your audience is critical. So this is another very important concept. Egocentrism versus ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism versus ethno-relativism. So this is another lens we can see our audience with. This is the critical one. Now, acquainting yourself with emotional intelligence, which is beneficial and will be discussed during future sessions. So, yeah, next slide, please. Now, writing for a general audience. Many publications prefer pieces with wide appeal, good readability, and accessible messages, which may use the description of general audience. Now, what is a general audience? If audiences are contextual, now this is debatably a misnomer because it may be conflating many different possible audiences. There's a little opinion. This is likely coded language for a maximal readership, which is important to publishers. Now, what the basic approach is, tell a story, avoid technical descriptive writing, and do not waste time and space. This is a little basic approach. All right, next. Now, there are some examples basically outlined for establishing purgatory and then the answers. Who? Like, for example, residents of New Mexico. What? Prevalence of unhoused and unsheltered adults in Espanola? When? Today, ongoing cuts to federal and state human services budgets. Where? Santa Fe, New Mexico. Why? Unhoused status as an ongoing threat to health and well-being. And how? Describe objective data and story of someone affected by this issue. So these are some of the examples which are outlined for establishing your message that will give a good clue what we are trying to write or pursue here. All right, next. Identify what narrative writing is and how it frequently structured. Then develop a concrete plan for a public scholarship activity you could pursue. Now, what is narrative writing? I'm pretty sure we are very familiar with this. Thanks to Dr. Graziano. We are working with her. So in 2 words, written storytelling is narrative writing. While not obligatory, narratives generally follow an expected structure, like number 1, characters, participants in the story, conflict, like a struggle or change in circumstances, a clear plot, which shows the sequence of events leading to main point of story, and then the setting, context of story, like time, place, etc. And then theme, which shows explicit and implicit messages. Arc, progression, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement, and resolution. So it's all like a film story as well, like a movie. Okay, next. How is narrative writing unique? Now, narratives are the products of individual experiences, memories, interpretations, and cultural beliefs. Others can dispute the factual elements of your story. They cannot dispute your interpretations. Humans actually tend to tell themselves mental stories to process and encode memories of significant events. Therefore, stories as a form have universal accessibility. Now, again, in short, narrative writing is one of the most powerful vehicles for delivering your message. why stories often dense in meaning. Next slide, please. That's a very interesting little Aristotle rhetorical triangle, I was amazed. It basically tells an overview of the three rhetorical appeals. One is ethos, which is the speaker, then is the logos, which is the message, and then is the pathos, which is the audience. So yeah, so basically Aristotle's rhetorical triangle explains persuasion through three elements: ethos, credibility; pathos, emotion; and logos, logic. And all three elements are critical to delivering an effective and compelling message. And from here, I'll give it to Dr. Duncan. Absolutely.
All right, you all. So you heard from Dr. Abbasi and Dr. Augustine about, really what we mean by public scholarship, and what really goes into, delivering that message that will really help people to see, your cause as being something important to join, as change, or considering, change is something that's really necessary for not only themselves, but the people around them. And so what we really want to do is get a little bit concrete with some examples, and then also have a little bit of time for people to come up with ideas and share if you're comfortable toward the end. So let's go in with some pieces that we've prepared over the past several months. A lot of these or actually all of these except one are all based on our residency program in Espanola. So this first one was one that came out in OpMed. This was back last year. It was around this time that I was really starting to think a lot more about the discussions around psychological safety, because at that point a lot of the ways that it had been presented to me, at least in a healthcare context, were purely through these team dynamics, and I think kind of removing the context of why it's really important for us to also interact in a way that's psychologically safe. And so this article really went into that aspect of it, really more the generalizable use of a tool like psychological safety. And so this is just, this was one example, but similarly with one of our Santa Fe residents, we followed up on that with kevinmd.com to actually look at this mostly, mostly through the same lens, but actually with a little bit of a different angle for this audience. So there was a little bit more of an exploration into the evidence behind this, and getting a little bit more, concrete about what do we actually understand about this, and what is still, left uncertain about psychological safety in a general context for patients, providers, staff, everyone involved in the healthcare arena. And so this was another example. This was one that actually all three of us worked on. So this was through STAT. This was their first opinion column. So one thing that has gotten a lot more traction recently, especially with the rise of our kind of mothership that is AI, so to speak, is the fact that we are really doing a lot of damage to our environment through our use of technology. And one thing that we covered in this piece is also the carbon footprint that's associated with our day-to-day work, that necessary work that we do in patient care every time we access an EMR, every time we upload a file, every time we save a lab report. All of this has to be stored somewhere, because that's how you access it. And so when these data are saved onto these giant data centers for later retrieval, this requires a lot of electricity, and it's really interesting when you start to dissect it, how much we do that seems completely innocuous on the surface, but really has a much bigger impact than it seems like. And so we went after that topic in that way. And I think now the discourse around AI's use and the amount of electricity that goes into even just like running a single query through ChatGPT, it's staggering. And this was just our way of, kind of getting into that space to talk about that in this particular publication. And then, as we're all aware of, there was a pretty significant event that happened at the end of last year with the former United Healthcare CEO, and the role that Luigi Mangione played in that person's death. And, in many ways, why we went after this article was one, what you heard from Dr. Augustine, which was the timeliness of being able to tackle the subject, but also, the fact that I think we wanted to speak to the fact that, this anger was very valid and that a lot of perceptions around what took place there were pretty complicated, and still are complicated. I think for a lot of people, there wasn't just a denunciation of this as just a simple murder, but this actually meant something a lot bigger for many people. And so we took that deep dive into it. And that's how we structured this particular piece for the Santa Fe New Mexican. So, what I wanted to do to get us set up for our activity, I wanted to leave this up for a little while. If everybody has some sort of like a little piece of paper, or if you want to just jot some things down into your phone, maybe in like a notepad app or something like that. I just want to go back to that whole idea of constructing a story that could potentially be shared later. So going back through those elements that Dr. Augustine was talking about around the structure of a story with characters, conflicts, plot setting, themes, and your overall progression of the story. I just want you to start. I just want you to kind of make a little note for this, because we want to hear from you all about the stories that you would like to tell and the types of support that you might need in pursuing this. So I'm going to leave this up for a few more seconds, and then I'm going to transition over to what we'll do with this. All right. So what we're going to do, based on the time we have left, we might go a little bit less. Let's actually make that let's make that 7 minutes. What I want everyone to do is just take some time to outline a story you could tell about the work you do on a day-to-day basis that really does affect the general public. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, there's not too much that my work does outside of my individual patients, I beg to differ. There's a lot that you do that has wide-reaching implications for the public. And some of it might even be around the people who are able to access you in a clinical setting versus those who aren't. So even begin to think about that side of it. You can use that template to help kickstart things, or just kind of go into your own free-form writing. But I want you to be as specific about the details as possible. Think about, what did it feel like? What did it look like? What did it sound like? Be able to really take people into the moment that you're trying to describe. And once the time's up, we'll go around, we'll share some of our ideas, and we will even talk about, some ideas of where you might want to submit this particular piece if you decide to flesh it out, or places that you can potentially present it. So I'll start a timer for us, but let's just take a little bit of time for the next 7 minutes to jot down some ideas. All right, so let's come back together and let's chat for a little bit. So, what did our group come up with? So what are some of the things that you're thinking about right now for some stories that you might be able to share? Mhm.
Sure, sorry, sir. Me. There's a patient like from no pain diarrhea, like even really like blood in his but next appointment he had Northern New Mexico gastroenterologist. It's like 6 months away. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's another character, Victoria. And he keeps calling the office and like, gee, they never pick the phone up. Yeah. Yeah. So, and there are three people like that, like the gastroenterologist, I've never actually like talked to them already. I kind of talked about the conflict we're having.
Mhm.
So, the blood, kind of like talked about the blood and conflict as well. Like,
Yeah.
The blood and conflict.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just, I I guess develop more, but that's pretty much thought of.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Just for everyone on Zoom too, I'm just going to kind of give a quick recap of that. So, Sangman had shared about, her experience with dealing with our shortage of specialists in the state, and I think this is something that is really appropriate and would have a lot of widespread appeal because I think sometimes as patients, it's easy to just see the one side of it, like why the heck are these, offices not answering my calls? Why can't I ever get scheduled? Even when I get scheduled, why is it 6 months out? Because the example that we heard was about our gastroenterology services around just getting things like screening colonoscopies, things like that, where it can take, an immense amount of time for patients to be seen, even in Santa Fe. So I think it's a point very well made. And I just to provide some feedback on that, I think it's something that, by sharing a story like that about the challenges you face as a provider of getting your patients that care, it can, I think, really bridge some gaps between the patient's perspective, which is I'm being neglected by the healthcare system, and for them to see that, oh, there are people fighting for me, but this just, this is an example of where the system is really broken, and to maybe offer some solutions, or at least, some potential inroads for our patients. So I appreciate you sharing. How about everyone else? Any other ideas you guys have right now? All right, we got another one in here.
And mental health dilemma. The medical field appreciates that often people need a step down from a hospital, acute care, to going home. So they go to a rehab center of some sort, 30 days roughly, to learn how to walk again, to learn how to, to get more stable. If you have an addiction problem, there are multiple places where someone can go for 30 days to 6 months to get rehab outside of the home.
Yeah.
When it comes to just chronic mental illness, you're in a psych hospital, you're lucky if you get 7 days. And then boom, you either go back home or you get released to a homeless shelter.
Yeah.
And there's no concept of, well, in order to get to the hospital, someone's burned a lot of bridges. And I have a case in particular, so to kind of center around that, a gentleman that when he gets psychotic, he becomes very violent. So over the past 6 weeks, he's threatened his neighbors. He's alienated all not only his landlord, threatening his landlord, saying that he was trying to kill him and poison him. And so we have 4 days at the psych hospital, and then they're going to discharge him either home, and the landlord won't let him come, or he goes to the homeless shelter.
Right.
And it's way too fragile. We need some kind of a step down, some kind of programs to help people get restable, so then they can either go to independent living or go back home. It's a huge gap.
I agree. And you all may have heard that a little bit better from Dr. Mash about that, the way the healthcare system treats physical and mental issues. I mean, we've definitely made some progress over the years, but I mean, it's not there though. And the example he was sharing that you may have heard was just around the fact that when patients have physical issues where they need rehabilitation services, they have access to things, potentially up to weeks or months. But when we're dealing with chronic mental health issues that can be just as catastrophic for health if not treated appropriately, people are offered things like 4 days in an inpatient unit to address all the issues they have. And the point was made about the step down process. And I think in both of your cases with the examples that you're sharing, the thing that really stands out to me is that there are models where this works better. And I won't say perfectly in the United States, but there are models for where we can I think take, a reader from the story where this is very familiar. I see this day in, day out with my neighbors, within my family, within my school, within my work, where people are affected by this. And then to say that there are ways we can do it and we can point to these models. What we need is to get people like our policymakers, others who actually can help to fund these, these initiatives on our side on that. And that would be, kind of a way, I think, in both cases to really, to kind of think about if you wanted to pursue this, how that could look practically, within the framework of something like an op-ed, opinion piece, whatever the case may be. And so I appreciate you all sharing. Now, out of respect for time, we're coming up on 1:30. I really appreciate the examples that were shared. And for everyone else, I want you to be thinking about, ways that, you may want to, pursue this in the future, or maybe this is just something for yourself too, and that is not inappropriate. But in the spirit of considering the public scholarship, concept for all of us, I would like to openly share my I'd like to openly share my email address. This will be for my Gmail. I think for all of us, we would love to be part of that writing journey. Sometimes it's really nice to bounce ideas off of folks, and so if that would be helpful going forth, let's make this more than just this talk today. Let's actually get you the support you need. I'm very happy to collaborate often on pieces, and so you can see, like, the examples we talked about, those were not written by one person, those were written by a whole group of people, and so in each case. And so I want to make sure that we make it more than just the talk today. Last couple of things, just because I'm a little dorky, and also because I am a big believer that one of the best ways to learn or to get ideas for your writing is to read or to listen to books. And so I think a lot of people are engaging with different books through the audiobook format. So I wanted to share some of my personal favorites that really actually helped me to come up with ideas at different points in my life. And so Attending is a really interesting book that kind of takes that whole humdrum of medicine and breaks it down to the practical levels of being very human within a very dehumanizing environment, often within our work. And Atul Gawande, I think a lot of people recognize this book probably, or at least have heard of it, Being Mortal. It's a very interesting one that we in the United States, because of our culture and the way our healthcare system is set up, we really disadvantage people toward the end of their lives, and sometimes to the point where they receive care that they don't really necessarily desire, but they're not necessarily able to articulate that, and families are put in really compromising positions. I think it's a really, it's a really beautiful take on that whole dilemma. To go through just a few more resources, you heard a little bit about Geoffrey Rose earlier. This was a groundbreaking one for me in terms of my public health training, which was the strategy of preventive medicine. This idea that what happens at the individual level does not necessarily translate to the population level in terms of risk, in terms of overall health. And it's really interesting to disentangle individuals from this population perspective, where it's just a bunch of people that we're taking care of. Therefore, whatever happens at the individual level automatically relates back to the population. Also, some of you may be familiar with Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that some people who are trained in neurosciences may find it, maybe it's a little bit rudimentary in certain parts, but I find it's a really, engaging way to think about how people act, how they think, how they process information. And so it's a great way to also, I think, to kind of springboard into some other projects. And then the op-ed project. We don't have time today to look at this website, but if you guys were just remember that one, maybe jot that one down. It is a fantastic free resource to tell you a lot of things about writing op-eds, where you can submit it, and really how to build out that part of your CV if that's something that's important to you. Well, with all that being said, we all really appreciate your time and attention today. I'm going to stop the share now. We really do want you guys to engage if it's something that would be helpful, kind of as even if it's kind of like a peer mentor model, for all of us. We just feel really strongly about the power of writing, the power of sharing your message, and the power of also just getting involved and building on your work. So thank you all so much for your time today, and we would appreciate any feedback you have on today's session, and we hope to continue to build up things from there.
All right, Dr. Duncan, Dr. Abbasi, and Dr. Augustine, thank you very much for that great presentation. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.